everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some pretty wild ideas about the future today. Specifically, Sam Altman's Moore's Law for everything.
Yes.
You probably know Altman from OpenAI, the company pushing the limits of what AI can actually do.
Right.
But in this essay, he's not just focusing on the tech itself. He's kind of painting this picture of future totally reshaped by AI, what that means for, jobs, the economy, like everything, what that means for all of us.
It's super interesting how he connects, these rapid technological advancements and how they could impact things like the cost of living and wealth distribution.
Yeah.
And he's not afraid to propose some, really radical solutions, too.
So Altman kicks things off with a pretty bold prediction. He says in just 5 years, we'll have AI that can, read legal documents and even give medical advice. Yeah. But then he takes it even further. AI on assembly lines, AI's companions, AI doing, practically everything.
It's are we ready for this?
Yeah, that's the big question. And Altman seems to think this whole AI revolution, it's inevitable. It's unlike anything we've seen before.
Right.
He compares it to huge leaps forward in human history, like agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, computers. But he believes the impact of AI, it's going to dwarf all of those combined.
It's almost like he's saying, buckle up. Yeah. Get ready for a world we can't even imagine yet.
Yeah. It's a pretty bold statement. But what I find really interesting is this idea that this revolution, this AI revolution, could generate enough wealth for everyone to have what they need. Mm-hmm. It's not just about fancy gadgets. It's about solving some fundamental problems,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to really understand that, we have to get his concept of Moore's Law for everything. You're probably familiar with the original Moore's Law, which basically says computing power doubles roughly every 2 years while costs stay the same.
Right.
We've all seen how that's played out.
Yeah.
Technology just gets cheaper and more powerful over time.
Totally. Think about how much more affordable TVs and computers are now compared to a few decades ago.
Yeah.
But then you look at stuff like housing, healthcare, education. Those costs just keep going up.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're playing on this, uneven playing field.
Right, and that's where Altman's Moore's Law for everything comes in. He argues that AI could bring that same exponential cost reduction to pretty much every part of the economy.
So instead of just our gadgets being cheaper, AI could actually tackle some of our biggest societal challenges.
Exactly.
That's a pretty powerful idea.
It is. And to give you a really concrete example, imagine AI robots being used to build houses. Mm-hmm. They work 24/7. They use locally sourced materials. They're powered by renewable energy.
Okay.
Suddenly, the cost of building a house and buying a house, it becomes a fraction of what it is today.
Wow. So this isn't just science fiction anymore. This could actually happen.
Right.
But if AI is doing all the work, what happens to jobs?
That's another key point that Altman addresses. He believes that this shift, it'll free us from a lot of traditional labor.
Okay.
Allowing us to focus on more creative and fulfilling things.
Yeah.
But, of course, we need a system to make sure everyone benefits from this new landscape.
Right. And that's where his ideas about capitalism and economic policy get really interesting. He says we need both growth and inclusivity for a stable economic system.
Yes.
But the traditional ways of, redistributing wealth, like income tax,
right,
they might not be enough in this world where AI is changing everything.
Yeah, she points out that capitalism, while it's good at driving growth, it also tends to create inequality. So he's proposing a pretty radical solution, and that is shifting the focus from taxing labor to taxing capital.
Wait, so instead of taxing our paychecks, we'd be taxing companies and land?
Exactly.
How would that even work?
Well, he has this plan. It's called the American Equity Fund, and that's what we're going to delve into next.
Okay. This is getting really interesting. We need to unpack this American Equity Fund and how it could change everything. Okay, so we left off talking about this American Equity Fund. It sounds kind of revolutionary, but how would it actually work?
Well, the basic idea is you create this fund, and it's fueled by two main sources. A tax on companies, above a certain valuation, and a tax on all privately held land.
So instead of taxing our income from working, we'd be taxing the value of these assets.
Exactly. Altman suggests a 2.5% annual tax on both. So companies, once they're worth a certain amount, would contribute shares to the fund, and for the land, it'd be a payment, based on its value.
Okay, so I'm trying to picture the scale of this. Like 2.5% of all that land and these massive companies. We're talking serious money here, right?
Well, absolutely. Altman estimates there's something like $50 trillion in U.S. company value right now, and like around $30 trillion worth of privately held land. And he thinks those numbers are going to probably double in the next 10 years.
Wow. Okay, so if all this money is going into this fund, how much would each person get?
That's where it gets really interesting. Based on his projections, Altman thinks that in 10 years, every adult in America could receive around $13,500 every year.
$13,500 a year just for being a citizen. That's a pretty big chunk of change, especially on top of whatever people are already making.
And remember, AI is supposed to make everything cheaper. So that $13,500 would go a lot further than it does today.
Yeah, you could afford better healthcare, education, maybe even invest in starting your own business. Everyone gets a boost.
Okay, but is this all too good to be true? What if companies just decide to, move overseas to avoid the tax?
That's a good question. But Altman talks about that. He suggests doing like a revenue-based test. So if a company makes most of its money from America, it would still have to pay into the American Equity Fund no matter where its headquarters are.
That makes sense. Stops companies from gaming the system. But wouldn't this discourage companies from, investing and growing? What if they just decide to give bigger dividends to shareholders instead? Altman thinks about that too. He suggests encouraging long-term growth by doing things like giving tax breaks for companies that reinvest their profits, or even penalties for companies that pay out too much in dividends. It's all about making sure everyone benefits from a strong economy.
Okay. So what about companies that stay private just to avoid the tax? There's got to be tons of successful companies that aren't public.
Altman has a solution for that too. He says we should have rules to tax private companies once they hit a certain revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't make sense for them to get a free pass forever.
All right, so we're closing all the loopholes, but here's something that's been bugging me. How do we stop people from voting for policies that just give them more money from the fund, even if it's, not good for the country in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's something Altman acknowledges. His solution is to basically make it part of the Constitution, like an amendment that sets the maximum tax rates for both companies and land. That way, no one can mess with the system to get a bigger slice of the pie.
So you're setting the rules of the game up front and making sure everyone plays fair? I like it. But let's talk about the land tax for a sec. How do you figure out the value of all that land? That seems like a logistical nightmare.
It definitely wouldn't be easy. But Altman has a couple ideas. Either you have a team of, super qualified people at the federal level who assess everything, or you let local governments keep handling assessments, but with, really strict rules to make sure they're accurate.
So, for example, if land in a certain area is consistently selling for way more or way less than what the government says it's worth, you'd adjust the assessments, make sure there's no funny business going on.
Exactly. Altman even talks about people maybe trying to borrow against their future payments from the fund. He suggests making those kinds of deals illegal. The government would basically promise that those future payments can't be used as collateral.
So it's really about giving people ownership, not just cash they can immediately blow. This is starting to sound pretty well thought out, even if it is a pretty radical idea. Is this really doable, or is Altman just being super optimistic?
Well, he makes this interesting comparison to the Great Depression. Back then, a lot of people thought having a social safety net was impossible. But then, under pressure, things changed a lot. FDR implemented a ton of new policies that totally changed America.
So Altman sees this as a similar moment, like the rapid advancements in AI are forcing us to rethink our whole economic system and our social systems too.
Exactly. He imagines a political movement that goes beyond the usual left and right stuff and brings together people who are both pro-business and pro-people. Because at the end of the day, everyone benefits when technology is used to create widespread prosperity.
That's a powerful idea. So how do we actually make this shift? Do we go all in at once or take it slow?
Altman thinks we should implement it gradually. He says start with smaller payments from the American Equity Fund and increase them as the economy grows. He even has a specific target in mind. Once the overall economy grows by 50% from when the law is passed, then the full 2.5% tax rates would start.
Makes sense. It gives everyone time to adjust and see how it works. And if AI really does make the economy grow that fast, a 50% increase might not be that far off.
Right. And Altman thinks this would create a kind of snowball effect. As people get more money from the fund, they spend more, which makes the economy grow even more, leading to even more wealth creation.
It's like a self-sustaining engine for prosperity.
Yeah.
But even if we do it gradually, this would still be a massive change. What other challenges haven't we talked about yet? Like, how do you actually give all this money and shares to millions of people?
Those are all good points, and we'll get into those and wrap up our deep dive when we come back.
So we've been talking about this American Equity Fund and how it could totally change our economy.
Yeah.
But even if we roll it out slowly, there's still going to be, like, bumps in the road, Ray.
Sure.
How do you get all that money and shares to so many people?
You're right. Like, the logistics of that would be huge. But think about it. We already have systems for things like Social Security and, like, tax refunds, right? The government could use that and maybe even work with, like, banks and stuff to make the whole process smoother.
Yeah, it's not like we'd be starting from zero.
Right.
But even if we figure out how to do it all, isn't there a chance that giving people all this money could actually make things worse? Like, what if people just stop working?
That's a worry a lot of people have. But Altman says the American Equity Fund would actually do the opposite.
Okay.
Because everyone would have some financial security, they'd actually be more likely to take risks, maybe start a business, or pursue something they're passionate about.
So it's not just a handout, it's about giving people a chance to invest in their future.
Exactly.
But let's step back for a minute. We've been focused on, like, the money stuff, but what about AI changing society as a whole? What's it going to be like when AI is doing almost everything?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And Altman talks about that, too, in his essay. He imagines a future where work is totally different. People have way more free time, more chances to be creative, and maybe even closer relationships in their communities.
It sounds kind of idealistic, but is there a downside to all this AI abundance? Like, do we lose something important about being human if we don't have to work?
Those are really deep questions.
Yeah.
And they're questions we have to figure out as a society. If AI can take care of all the basic stuff, we have to decide what's really important.
Right.
Like, what gives our lives meaning? What does success mean if money isn't the main thing anymore?
It's like we're going into uncharted territory. It's exciting, but a little scary, too.
Totally. And that's what I think is so great about Altman's essay.
Yeah.
He's not just saying, here's the answer.
Right.
He's starting a conversation about what kind of future we want.
And even if you don't agree with everything he says, he's bringing up some super important points.
Definitely. He reminds us that the future isn't set in stone. We create it by the choices we make now.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Okay.
We've talked about how AI could completely revolutionize everything, the good and the bad, and the really big questions we need to think about as a society.
It's been a really interesting conversation, and hopefully it's given you some new things to consider.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. What kind of future do you want? What part are you going to play in this AI world that's coming?
Yeah, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep talking about it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Moore's Law for everything.
See you next time.